What's up, you awesome geeks? It's time for another build marathon. So many of you reached out to us after our last wall build, asking if we would do this again and if we could take you through the whole process of putting our Millennium Falcon inspired bench together. So here we go. Today in the Smugglers Room, we're working on part 6 of our Star Wars room build. And we're going wild for floor mats because we're going to use them as cushions for our couch. Seriously, floor mats make great cushions. That's coming up. What's up, you awesome geeks? I'm Brian and welcome to the Smugglers Room. This week, this chubby geek is working on part 6 of our Smugglers Room build. And we're addressing one of the aspects of this room that intimidates me the most. It's the crash couch, or the Falcon style bench, or the Dejaric table bench, or whatever bench you want to call it. This section of the room has plagued me with uncertainty. It's one of those spaces that I just have been afraid to really tackle because I'm afraid it won't look the way I want it to. You want to know how long it's been? My father and I built the actual frame of the bench in October of 2015. Yeah, seriously. We built this prior to ever launching the channel, and I just let it sit and sit and sit. So that's it. It's 2020. We're diving in head first, and we're going to tackle the hardest part of the room, in my opinion. Fortunately for all of us, there's an amazing group on Facebook right now where they are building a lot of these crash couches and the Dejaric table. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I'm sure someone will let me know if I'm not. But it's the table that you see in the Falcon, the chess table with the monsters that they play on. One of the builders in particular, Conrad Fleming, has a custom-sized booth for his Wandering Wampa tiny home, and it's incredible. He was also kind enough to put up his Falcon seat patterns for the group. Thank you so much, Conrad. So, the plans and patterns, that's where I'm gonna start. And do yourself a favor and listen to your wife, or your spouse, or your dog, or whoever it is in your home that is smarter than you are. They'll save you from diving in and cutting a bunch of stuff that actually is not going to fit in the space that you have because it's unique to you. And then you have to start over. Yeah, that happened. Anyway, my bench is a unique size for the space, so we're gonna have to make some adjustments. The patterns themselves worked for the most part, but laying them out showed me where I'm going to have to create custom pads for my unique bench. And yes, all those little tiny holes and dings in the foam that's already there, our cat Bosk decided that this was a perfect place to test out the strength of his claws. Don't worry, I'll have a little tip on how we can fix all those holes in the next episode. Okay, enough rambling, let's start by cutting some patterns. Choosing what material to make these pads out of was actually the biggest consideration, but I channeled my inner Punish props and SKS props and decided to go with EVA foam. The mat on its own is too thin for me, so I wanted to double them up. But cutting out the pattern by hand and then trying to make sure that they were matched perfectly is a really tough thing. Ideally, it would have been easier to glue them together and then cut the pattern. I know, probably makes sense to you, but I was so excited to get to cutting that I completely missed it. It was also at this time I decided to move over to the bandsaw. I'll be honest, I had always planned on using the bandsaw, but don't get discouraged if you don't have one, because you've seen all you really need is a sharp razor, a blade sharpener, and patience to get this done. I just don't have any patience, so the saw was the way for me. Now, for the rest of the patterns, I smartened up and glued full pieces of mats together, and it made things a lot easier. By the way, contact cement is your friend when working with EVA foam. Apply it to either side of your pieces, let it set long enough to just be tacky, and then carefully assemble your pieces together. You will see that there is a diamond pattern on one side of the mat, and I decided not to grind that pattern down. I really wasn't thinking it was necessary for what I was doing, and it bonded perfectly even with the pattern. So I use my router table to round over the edges. If you don't have a router table, you could use a hand router. And if you didn't have that, you could use a sanding drum on your Dremel tool. So there are many ways for you to achieve this round over. Heat sealing is another aspect you'll want to do. It helps get rid of all those pesky little fuzzies that you'll no doubt have, as well as seal the outside of the foam. Now, one aspect that I didn't show was the use of this. It's Quick Seal. And basically what you do is you take it and apply it to the edges or anywhere on your foam pad that you might have holes or anything that you want to seal, like perhaps the seam when they join together. This will dry, you can lightly sand it, and then you can apply a sealer on the outside. As for the sealing, we chose Plasti-Dip, and it was only after making a massive mess in the shop that I remembered a quick tip from Punish Props Academy, using a scrap piece of foam to create a super convenient handle to hold your piece while you spray. Okay, let's talk about my favorite subject, greeblies. And the couch bench has them. They're right in the foam. Now, in the Millennium Falcon itself, they're really specific. But since mine isn't the Falcon, I wanted to create my own and show you how you can do that. As you can see, just a piece of styrene and some random parts from my greebly bins, and you have a cool little detail. However, since we need so many, and that I want them all to be the same, I decided to make a mold. For that, we'll use some smooth-on silicone and some resin. I'm going to use a large tub of Mold Max 30 that I have on hand, but I'll list some trial size units for this episode in the description that are much cheaper, because you really won't need that much for this size of greebly. lot of pad pieces needed for the bench, and we haven't even made the actual seat pads that you sit on, plus the custom pads we need to fill in certain space. Today in the Smugglers Room, we're continuing with part 7 of our Star Wars room build, and we're going to pattern foam, cut foam, shape foam, and weather foam, as well as a little greebly foam. That's a lot of foam, and that's coming up. I think this part of the project was intimidating because of the patterns, and I wasn't sure what to make them out of and how to put it all together so that it didn't suck. Now, if you watched our last part, part 6 of the Star Wars room build, you saw that we used EVA foam, specifically the floor pad kind. We laminated a bunch of those together, we cut out the shapes, and we got those plasti-dipped and ready. But it was only halfway to what we needed to do to have this ready for paint. Our bench is not a true replica. It doesn't match the Millennium Falcon's bench in any way, shape, or form, which means that we have to modify our patterns to make it work for the very small area that we have it in. So for this, I called upon my amazing wife, Carissa, and said something like, "Can you do this for me? I don't want to," which basically means, I'm bored, this is tedious, I don't want to do it. Love that woman. Here we go. Now, for the actual seat cushions, I did not go with typical EVA foam made from floor mats. I wanted a thick, high density, and quality foam for this, so I chose foam from TNT Cosplay. They have a wide range of foam, but specifically this extra thick 24mm foam that seemed perfect for what I wanted. You see, I wanted to maintain the same material between the back pads and the seat, so everything painted and weathered pretty much the same. But I also wanted something around an inch thick, and I certainly did not want to glue more pads together like we did in the last episode. The process for this is pretty much the same as well. We make a pattern, trace a pattern, and then cut it out with a sharp knife. was far from perfect. I had pieces that I cut a little wonky, and during the install I was off on several of them. Part of this was my fault, and the other part was just the nature of what I was doing with these big foam pieces in such a tight area. But all of this can be addressed. The fact that it's foam allows me to go back and trim all the pieces while they're in place. You'll see the result of that in a bit. Since we cut out all the foam by hand instead of using something like the laser, each piece is a little bit different. My skills at cutting foam and matching one pattern to the next perfectly is far from perfect. So each piece was a little unique when it came time to install. Part of me wanted to scrap the whole thing, start over and laser cut everything exactly. But as much as I love my laser cutter, the hand touch that this bench has is what makes it ours. In the end, there's nothing wrong with a little handmade look if you're happy with the outcome. Plus, we have many places, in the words of Adam Savage, to hide our crimes. Remember, you're a maker because you enjoy the art of making, right? I want to point out that when painting and weathering this bench, we worked in layers. I airbrushed some shadows, then went in with some burnt umber and Mars Black, washed way down with water, followed by some dry brushing. The overall goal is to keep adding layers and giving the object a use-worn look. When working on something this large, I like to use every tool I can to build those layers. And now we have a pretty decent base for the bench. It's far from finished and far from perfect, but I'm really happy to have this one part behind me. I'm sure for you, like there was for me, in every project there's that one little piece that's either super intimidating or whatever the case is that you avoid tackling that. And I say, just go for it. Let's see what happens and see what you can come up with. I recently finished reading Adam Savage's book, Every Tool's a Hammer. And in one section of the book, Adam spends a great deal of time discussing cardboard, specifically as a medium to help with mock-ups and sussing out your design before you commit to expensive material. Now, I will say, this is foreign territory for me. I have always flown by the model of use up the expensive stuff twice. That way you can say the project cost you twice as much as it did, which in hindsight is probably why this is the second version of this room. That said, I took Adam's advice on this part of the build, and I'm really glad I did. Using the cardboard for the odd shape of the back of the bench, in combination with the poor construction of my basement walls by the contractor, I was able to get the shape I needed on the first try, transferring to a fresh sheet of 1/2-inch MDF and totally nailing the fit. This method will no doubt become part of my regular construction process going forward, especially when it's something I need to see in the space before I spend days working on it. I guess it's fair to say I'm in love with cardboard now. Now, to create all the boxes for the control panels, I cheated. Well, I cheated a little bit. I found a program online via the Glowforge Maker community that's totally worth sharing with you. It's called MakerCase, and I'll link to the website in the notes below for you. This free program allows you to create a box of virtually any design. You input your dimensions, material thickness, and other details, and it creates the box in 3D for you. Then you select the download box plans, and you'll have additional features before you select the format you want to download. I was able to create the exact size and shape boxes I needed for my project and send those over to the laser cutter and let it do the work for me. This would work for other laser cutters, engravers, as well as CNC machines like the X-Carve as well. Now, could I have made these boxes without this? Of course, and you can too. I just thought this was a valuable resource that I wanted to share, and while the laser cutter was working, I was able to work on other aspects of the build. That, and I wanted a very exact box, because I plan on using the laser cutter to help me perfect the panels out of black acrylic, but more on that in a bit. Additionally, I used CA glue to put these together, but that was after I used wood glue on the first three. The wood glue works perfectly, but it was taking a good long while to set up for every glue up, using all the clamps, and I grew incredibly impatient. That said, the CA glue on MDF worked like a champ, and they're rock solid. overall construction of these back box control panels are built in 2 sections. This allows me to more easily move the unit from the shop to the basement and back. It allows me a bit more flexibility in the shop too, because this thing is so massive when it's together. Now, of course, my friends, if there was any time to dig into the Greebly bins, it's now. These panels will have an assortment of fun stuff to add details, and of course, this is my favorite part. I've mentioned before, but we get all these awesome goodies in a variety of places. We take electronics apart, we purchase machined aluminum lots from sellers on eBay, and everywhere else we can find interesting stuff. Check out our Great Greebly series in the card above or the description below for more information. Many of you have asked about these awesome red lenses. We actually have been holding on to these for many, many years. They were purchased from Blue Realm Studios a long time ago, and sadly, they no longer sell them. Okay, so the panel designs themselves were done in Adobe Illustrator. That happens to be my software of choice. But if you want free software, go ahead and check out Inkscape. I'll put a link in the description below for you. I use the software to create the panel design and create the exact cut and shape I want. Since I'll be using the laser cutter for this, I'm able to use calipers to get exact measurements from the Greeblies I chose and create the holes for attachments and other fine details. Okay, we fully realize that this part of the project we are leaning very heavily on the laser cutter. We really strive to make a variety of projects for you with all types of tools and materials. Given that, I wanted these panels to be made out of black acrylic, and in order to do that, I wanted super fine detail, and the laser cutter just happens to be the best tool I have to get this done. My friends, I have searched high and low for these blue and white tiles. They are iconic, Star Wars, and needed for this kind of project. That said, I have never found any that satisfied my needs. So, we made them on our Glowforge. And you've asked me where to get them. And when I say we make them, you've also asked if you could purchase from us. Well, I've made a few for some of you, and for more that have asked, I just decided let's go ahead and make a bunch and put them up on our store along with a bunch of other stuff for your projects. So have at it. Consider your search for the white and blue tiles over. We got you covered. I always say that nothing says Star Wars like pinstriping. So that's what we're doing. Cheap pinstripe tape that can be found at your local auto store or online, and we'll have links in the description for you on where you can find it. By the way, that's not blood on my fingers. My wife was certain I had cut the ever-living crap out of myself when she was editing this. But it's just a little bit of that So Strong tint that exploded all over the case. Great stuff. Gets everywhere if you let it. So I made these blue and white tiles out of 1/8 inch acrylic, which is great. But for this project, I wanted them to stick out proud of the surface. So it made a little extra work for myself and glued together all of these with Weld-On 3. I followed that up with a ridiculous gluing method of balancing the white tile flush with the inside edge of the acrylic frame, and it wasn't my best moment. It looked great, but it was painstakingly slow and not the most stable. So I made little boxes and mounted them to the back of the tiles. These are slightly smaller, and there's a 1/32 inch lip on all 4 sides of the box's tile. That allows the white or blue tile to rest upon it and has a surface to glue to. And now I have a small box for the LED light to sit in it as well. You know, 2 Jawas with 1 romp rat and all that. My friends, I messed with trying to drill and mount these heat sinks way longer than it should have taken me. I was trying to put the bolts in the back of the heat sink, and I kept confusing myself to the point of drilling many holes over the course of an hour, and I still got it wrong. It's never the thing you think that's going to slow you down that does. So don't get discouraged and just keep going. I mean, in the end, I got it right. Sort of. After the amount of work done, I sure felt like I should have had more to show you. These details kicked my Ewok, but I'm very happy thus far. There's obviously a lot of work yet to complete the control panels, and we have 3 more panels to build, the trim around the panels, paint, weathering, and then there's the electronics. So next week we'll have all of that to show you, and we're going to put our schematics and the line drawings and every other bit of detail we can on our Patreon page to share with you there. And I'm so excited to see how this comes alive and share that with you. Okay guys, so I've cut a few pieces of 1/4-inch MDF with some unique shapes that we're going to put as detail, surface detail on the side of the bench. I have 2 pieces, one that's about 17 inches long and the other about 14. These are going to help hold this 2 pieces of MDF together. When we use the laser cutter or the CNC or any of that, we end up with a lot of remnants. It's leftover pieces and most people would throw away, and I tend to save because I can use them uniquely. And I can use the shapes to actually border things. So for example, on this electrical retro box, it happens to fit perfectly around the box, along with all of our greeblies. So these are the greeblies we made in one of our Great Greeblies episodes that we'll link here in the description, but adding these with the remnants and a few other details should help this all tie together and look the way we want. Okay guys, we have gone ahead and finished the front panel for the right side of the booth, and now we're going to do the left side. I've got a piece cut with the weird shape, and you can see that I've got not the cleanest cut, and there's a seam, and it's a strange shape and the corner's really tight. I don't really want to cut this whole piece again and waste another piece of material, so we'll hide the crime with some scraps. And what's great is I have a ton of scraps that I save after the laser cutter finishes a project. So the negative space gets saved and I put it in a box, and then for something like this I can use those pieces again, and now I'm maximizing the material that I have and that I've used, and I'm also finding a neat and interesting way to add detail to the surface of this but also cover up the mistakes I made. So we'll go ahead and we're going to go and use a variety of these pieces to solve this problem. These came out of the drawer faces I made for the assembly table, and I went ahead and added some holes for some mounting brackets, and I added the Arabish script, and I can spread them out and we can hide the seam. Now we also have these little gaps that we have to deal with, and these are also laser cut leftovers. Okay, let's get this all glued up. humble electrical retro box is in the top of my list of interesting components you can add to your project. You can mount them, drill them, and so much more. Most importantly, no one ever really looks at the back of an electrical box, so it's not very recognizable to the average person. I made this little beauty from pouring resin into a plastic holding container for my eggs from the grocery store. Yeah. Now, of course, we have to weather this, and now would be a good time to point out to you that I broke one of my cardinal sins when working with MDF. I didn't sand or seal it first. I know, but hear me out. I noticed the texture of the big MDF pieces, and I sorta liked it. So I went out on a limb and tried to decide if I could use the rough surface to add additional texture to the panels. Now, I'm not 100% sure I like the ultimate finish, but I don't really hate it either. It's one of those things I wanted to experiment with, and that's the point. Don't be afraid to try something that might give you a different result. You never know what you're gonna find unless you try. I guess there really is a do or do not, because there is no try. I drilled all the holes out just a hair undersize from the diameter of my bolt. This way, when I screwed them in place, the bolt would actually create threads and help me hold everything together. I also put nuts on the back of these so they're 100% secure, but threading the soft wood worked really well. Now, to hide all the gaps between the panels and the bench, I added some tubing. This wire loom, which is split, works great here. It hides the crimes as well as adds some additional detail that I want. It's time for some zip ties. That these simple black zip ties just as good to use as anything else. And even though that they're a invention of our own planet here, I think it still works and it will blend in nice. It just looks like a tie. We're gonna do it that way. Now, this is a pretty simple step in the entire bench build, but I can already get a feeling for how this is going to look finished. I'll tell you that I don't like the black tube that I used, and I'll be swapping that out for another length of gray. And I know the tubing also looks unfinished at this point, but by the time you see it next week, you'll see how we'll tie that all together. I've decided to crank really hard on this bench area and totally finish it off really soon. With this project being as large as it is, you can lose momentum because nothing ever really feels totally finished. So expect to see a lot more on this space in the coming weeks. We're going to really get into the weeds on this next week. We have a lot of electronics work that I want to get done, and I want to show you how all of that comes together. Okay, to kick things off, we need to finish up the remaining panels for the bench. To be honest, this is just the fun part for me. What I constantly tell myself is not to overdo it. You can add too many details and clutter up the look really quickly. Personally, I like a certain amount of room to breathe between my greeblies. It's more interesting overall. We are asked constantly where we get the parts, and the answer is always the same: everywhere. We collect from old computers, electronics, scrap aluminum, plastic lids, and so on. Just keep looking around the world and you'll see things every day that inspire you. Now, before we go any further, I think we need to talk about the electronics, which is what the bulk of this build episode is all about. And it might be easier if we show a diagram, so at least you see the roadmap of where we're going. For the electronics, let's start with an Arduino. Then we're going to need some LEDs, we're going to need a terminal block to wire all the LEDs to, and of course, we're going to need a source of power. Now, with the amount of LEDs and the use of external power supply, I need something that I could solve a lot of problems with, and I decided to use a MOSFET. Now, we need to wire the Arduino to the MOSFET for control. We need to wire the LEDs to the terminal block, then wire the terminal block to the MOSFET, power to the LEDs, and then ground to everything. Okay, so anyone confused? Yeah, I know, I'm sorry. There's a lot going on here. And then I introduced a MOSFET, which sounds more like a creature from Dagobah than it does a piece of electronics. So let's start there. Okay, a MOSFET is a type of transistor, specifically a metal oxide semiconductor field effect transistor, MOSFET. It has 3 pins: the source, the drain, and the gate. They effectively control the electrical current flowing between the source and the drain contacts. Basically, this enables electrical devices to be turned on or off. Let's look at how we'll be using it. This is a wiring diagram for one of our panels, and I drew one up for each panel. You can see that this particular diagram has 3 of the MOSFETs. This allows us to dedicate a pin or multiple pins from the Arduino to the MOSFET, which we will gate the signal between the drain and the source that allows our signal to go through. Think of this like a series of pipes where you have a valve for each pipe, and as you open a valve, you'll let the water flow through the direction you want it to go. Okay, so one thing I really wanted was the LED to glow properly without a hotspot, and that was the biggest challenge. But thankfully there's an awesome subscriber like you, and because of that I learned all about packing material as a diffuser. Now I'm going to apologize right now because whichever one of you amazing geeks it was that told me about this, I can't for the life of me find your comment to share your name with everyone. So if it was you, say it loud and proud in the comments below because we sure appreciate it. This little trick and some Gorilla Tape was all that was needed. So much for my clever little acrylic LED boxes. Oh well, that's what happens. tell you right now that wire management is a big obsession of mine. It stems back to all those years building custom audio-video racks, but it also just makes working on all of this so much easier if it's clean. If ever I have to service these panels, I will thank myself for the extra time I spent now. Okay, let's talk about how I mounted the panels. I drilled through the MDF with a slightly smaller diameter drill bit than the hex head bolts I have. I then drilled in the bolts. The MDF was soft enough to create threads out of the material, and it works pretty dang well. Typically I'd use nuts on the other end, but the only people that are going to know about this are you and me. So let's keep that between us. Can I take a moment to say how much we appreciate our Patreon members? You may not believe it, but all of you make this channel possible. We thank you so much. We're also gearing up next week as we're going to be sharing behind-the-scenes episodes, as well as sharing the design process that goes into all of our projects. Finally, we're going to allow our patrons to help drive the projects we take on. That's right, we want your input on which projects we should do, which projects we should do more of, and so on. So if you're a Patreon member already, well, get ready, it's going to get exciting. And if not, then have a look below and consider joining us. Thank you very much. Now this is a massive terminal block, and if I had more smaller ones on hand, I would have used them. But I found this one in the junk lot from an electronics store, and it's perfect for this. Terminal blocks are a great way to sort out your wiring, especially in this case when we have multiple groups of LEDs. This allows us a clean way to land all of our wires, document where they are, and then be able to make adjustments and troubleshoot later. Remember our portable soldering station? I mean, come on, my friends. Where else does it get better for a chubby geek to sit back, relax, and do a little bit of soldering? For this, I'm using a power distribution system made by Middle Atlantic. It has a range of terminals from 5 volt to 24 volt. It's not an off-the-shelf consumer product, but I'll link specifically what the model is for you below, and if you have a custom AV company near you or access to eBay, you might be able to pick one up if you're interested. All the electronics will sit here, and this will still be accessible as we add other details to the bench. Now, what do you say we power this thing up, huh? Okay, the lights are cool, but let's add just a few more things to this before we wrap it up. Do you remember our custom DL44 display project? If you haven't seen that build, we'll post a link above and in the description. But this is where we have always intended it to be on display. We also needed some of that great looking wire loom tubing all around this bench. Now, all of these little bits are adding layers to our bench corner, but we realize it still has a long way to go. We added a little space gray paint to the back wall, but eventually, as we go along, all of this will be filled in. The blaster display looks great, but it will be completely part of the back wall design as we move along. Right now, it's sort of floating in midair. We have props and collectibles that will be integrated into the bench above and around. And before you know it, all of this will look like one piece. I'm more excited about how this is turning out than I thought I would be. I'm so energized to get this fully finished, and I'm crazy pumped to show you our Dejaric table design. I think you're gonna love it. Now, all of what you're seeing is really starting to come together, and the space is starting to show at least little bits of what I've intended it all along, and I'm super excited. So we hope you're ready for some crazy updates and more projects, because we're back in the shop, and we're working on a bunch of things for the room. We have some new projects that are rolling out, just more projects than we can possibly keep in our mind at one time, because you know, we love building something out of nothing. And wild and crazy projects that were, nope. So we hope you're ready for some, nope. Back working in the shop. So we hope you're ready. So we projects together, maybe some dueling. Nope. Oh, we just love building something out of nothing. And we'll see you next time. Nope, we're not going to do that again.